The term Niagara Falls actually refers to 3 waterfalls in close proximity. First, we have the American Falls, which are quite magnificent in their own right. Next to it, separated by tiny Luna Island, is the much smaller Bridal Veil Falls, which may be considered the baby of this bunch. Both of these are on the American side of the border with Canada. In the center is Goat Island, which separates the American Falls from the unparalleled and amazing Horseshoe Falls, which is on the Canadian side of the border. This semicircular astonishment is what most people envision when you say the word Niagara. Extraordinary is far too small a word to describe it. Due to the odd contours of the border in this region, the American Falls are to the north, while Canada's Horseshoe Falls are to the south. Traditionally, many newlyweds have taken their honeymoon at Niagara Falls. This all traces back to Theodosia Burr Alston and her husband Joseph Alston. Theodosia was the daughter of Aaron Burr, a name which keeps cropping up in our studies of early American oddities. There are many legends and mysteries in these parts. One claim in particular caught my attention during my college days, more years ago than I care to reveal. While rummaging through some old books in a thrift store, I found a small green paperback, one of those little volumes of oddities and wonders. It was written, if memory serves, by Brad Steiger. According to this work, around midnight, on March the 29th, 1848, huge chunks of ice blocked the head of the Niagara River, and so the water came to a stop, and Niagara Falls ran dry. Now, even at that time, thousands of people lived in this area thanks to the mills and the factories which used the river as a source of power. Well, there was no work that day. Families were free to explore the bare stones of the riverbed, walking where no human beings had ever walked before, and never would again. Did this event actually happen? I had my doubts, even though I should not disrespect a fellow Fortean. The truth is, nobody ever called Brad Steiger a rigorous scholar. For a while I became obsessed with verifying this story. I spent a number of very happy hours in the UCLA Research Library, learning whatever I could about the history of Niagara Falls. I mean, it was either that or attend classes. I found an old book published by W.E. Tunis titled Tunis's Topographical and Pictorial Guide to Niagara. It was published in 1856, a mere 8 years after the alleged Great Freeze. This book, which you can now find in the Internet Archive, is filled with all sorts of lore and poetry and intricate drawings. Alas, the book makes no reference to the 1848 mystery. For a while, I thought that Brad Steiger got it wrong. But then I found a book called Niagara and Other Famous Cataracts of the World, written by one George W. Hawley and published in 1883. Now, this is an impressive volume, and it has even better illustrations. Sure enough, the story is in there. Hawley was a direct eyewitness. He describes how it happened. Even though that winter had been relatively mild, Lake Erie still had large fields of ice. A stiff easterly wind had pushed this ice right into the head of the Niagara River. Basically, the bottle was corked. Now, this is from Hawley's account. The consequence was that when we arose in the morning at Niagara, we found our river was nearly half gone. The American Channel had dwindled to a respectable creek. The British Channel looked as though it had been smitten with a quick consumption and was fast passing away. Far up from the head of Goat Island and out into the Canadian Rapids, the water was gone, as it was also from the lower end of Goat Island out beyond the tower. The rocks were bare, black, forbidding. The roar of Niagara had subsided almost to a moan. The scene was desolate, and but for its novelty and the certainty that it would change before many hours, would have been gloomy and saddening. There are few places on the globe where a person would be less likely to go lumbering than in the rapids of Niagara just above the brink of the Horseshoe Fall. All the people of the neighborhood were abroad, exploring recesses and cavities that had never before been exposed to mortal eyes. The writer went some distance up the shore of the river. Large fields of the muddy bottom were laid bare. The shellfish, the univalves, and the bivalves were in despair. Their housekeeping and domestic arrangements were most unceremoniously exposed. The clams, with their backs up and their open mouths down in the mud, were making their sinuous courses towards the shrunken stream. The small fry of fishes were wriggling in wonder to find themselves impounded in small pools. And night closed over the strange scene. But in the morning our river was restored in all of its strength and beauty and majesty, and we were glad to welcome its swelling tide once more. Many years after I first read this book, when various newspaper archives became available on the internet, I found further confirmation for the story. Reports appeared in the Buffalo Commercial Advertiser of March the 30th, 1848, and the Buffalo Express of March the 31st, 1848. Over a century later, the event received mention in the Toronto Globe and News of March the 30th, 1955. Now, I bet that a news clipping from that newspaper reached Brad Steiger. According to these articles, those who explored the dry riverbed in 1848 found muskets and bayonets from the War of 1812, several important battles having been fought in this area. The South Australian Register of December the 9th, 1848, reported that ladies and gentlemen rode in carriages 1/3 of the way across the river towards the Canada shore, over solid rock as smooth as a kitchen floor. Now, everybody knows there is a ferry boat at the bottom of the falls called the Maid of the Mist. So actually, there have been a number of these boats over the years, but they've all had the same name. In 1848, the owner of the Maid of the Mist took this opportunity to dynamite a few craggy rocks which had often threatened their ferry boat. Now, at this time, there had been a religious revival in the area. They called it the Burnt-Over District for that reason. So naturally, people saw religious significance in the phenomenon. Perhaps they thought God was punishing America for its aggression against Mexico. Or perhaps it was a portent of the Last Judgment. The blockage lasted more than 30 hours. Eventually, the ice melted enough to restart the river, and Niagara Falls suddenly roared back to life. In 1969, the Americans decided to dam the tributary leading to the American Falls in order to let geologists study erosion. I'd say that the resultant film footage of that event matches Hawley's description of the Horseshoe Falls in 1848. Everything was black, bare, and forbidding. On a number of later occasions, the falls seemed to freeze over, either partially or completely. This happened in 1883, 1888, 1895, 1902, 1909, and other years. A photo from 1911 is sometimes incorrectly said to represent the 1848 event. In fact, there are no photographs of what happened in 1848. On all of the later occasions, only the outer shell of the water froze. Beneath the ice, the water continued to flow. In more recent years, 2014, 2015, the polar vortex caused much of Niagara Falls to freeze, and the results were spectacular. Daredevils even scaled the icy wall, but once again, the water kept running beneath the ice. And that's the way it's always going to be. You see, the falls now provide hydropower, and so ice cutters are always going to ensure that the river will keep flowing. What people saw in 1848 will never be seen again. There are other mysteries in this area. About 3.5 miles north of the falls, on the American side of the border, you will find Devil's Hole State Park. This was the site of a famous 1763 massacre, when the Seneca tribe, incensed at white encroachment on their lands, wiped out a train of British supply wagons, murdering some 81 soldiers. The area has had a paranormal reputation ever since, with the wildest rumors centering on a hard-to-reach cavern known as the Cave of the Evil Spirit. This widely republished quotation is said to come from a 1915 tourist pamphlet. Down by Devil's Hole, there are mysterious apparitions, foreign language chants, and sometimes the feeling that someone is watching you, or simply just brushed you gently as they passed you by. The light never really does seem to shine fully on this long descent, and many locals will not go down there at night, not because of crime. It is just a given knowledge. You don't want to go there. Well, that's all very spooky, but I've seen no actual evidence of inexplicable activity in this hollow. It seems to be a favorite spot for teens to sneak a beer or a joint. Nothing abnormal about that. About 5.5 miles northwest of the falls, on the Canadian side of the border, is the locally famous Screaming Tunnel, which runs under a railroad track. These tunnels always seem to be magnets for local folklore. According to a story which has been passed along for several generations, a little girl died in this tunnel. There are maybe half a dozen conflicting accounts of how and why she died. Some say that she was murdered, others say that she escaped a house fire and died of her injuries. As always, nobody will ever show you a news article proving that this girl ever existed. Nevertheless, for many years, groups of young people have come here at night to perform a kind of ritual. They go to a certain spot in the middle of the tunnel. One attendee holds a candle. We are told that at midnight the candle suddenly goes out of its own accord. And that's when a girl's scream rings out. And of course, since everyone is Canadian, they all offer profuse apologies to the ghost, and then they quietly file oot. Does that really happen? Nah, but I love these stories anyways. There are many other purportedly supernatural and odd events in the general vicinity of Niagara Falls. In fact, about 9 or 10 miles northwest of the falls, there was a poltergeist event back in 1970 that was particularly well attested. This one impressed even me, and I don't normally go in for that sort of thing. We may devote another video to the events around Niagara Falls. In the meantime, please like, please subscribe, and please tell others about our strange tales.